Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Iveson, the podcast where she speaks to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about why they connect with nature.
Taryn Eyton is a Squamish-based writer and the founder of the outdoor adventure website HappiestOutdoors.ca. She is also the author of 2 hiking guidebooks, Backpacking in Southwestern British Columbia, The Essential Guide to Overnight Hikes, and Backpacking on Vancouver Island, The Essential Guide to the Best Multi-Day Trips and Day Hikes. Taryn is a Leave No Trace Master Educator, the president of the Friends of Garibaldi Park Society, a member of the board of directors of the Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival, and a fellow of the Canadian Geographic Society. Please welcome Taryn Eyton from HappiestOutdoors.ca. Taryn, very happy to finally get you on Let's Take This Outside. This is so fun.
Great. Thanks for having me.
We met at the Travel Media Association of Canada's conference, which was in St. John's, Newfoundland this year. And we were on the same media trip to Grow Some More, and it was called Hike Your Arse Off. That felt like it was years ago at this point.
Yeah, I feel like a lot has happened in my life since then. But I also was looking at some of the photos recently, and it was such a good trip.
Was that your first time in Newfoundland?
No, it was my second. I had been there maybe 15 or 20 years before in sort of the pre-digital camera, pre-internet age. I was in my early 20s. And so it was a really different trip.
We did this media trip afterwards. It was a lot of everyone was taking pictures from all angles all the time. That was my first media trip. So it was very eye-opening to see all these travel media people just in their element. It was very eye-opening for me.
Yeah, content creation is wild. It's crazy how much work goes into it and how many different ways people are doing it and being really creative with it. And it was eye-opening for me as well, because a lot of the people on our trip are creating different kinds of content than I create. So it was really fun to see.
I have to say, when you said you lived in Squamish, I was so jealous. That is a mecca in Canada for adventure. You have ocean right there. You have mountains right there. But you grew up in Vancouver, which is, I don't want to say it's the same thing, but you grew up on the West Coast.
Yeah, I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver and lived there almost my entire life. So certainly I had a lot of access and opportunities to go outdoors, mostly, because my family, especially my dad, were interested in taking us outside. But it wasn't until I was in university and started exploring on my own that the outdoors became a real priority and a passion, which is what led us to move to Squamish about 4 years ago to be closer. I was tired living in Vancouver of commuting across the bridge to the mountains, and 45-minute to an hour drive each way in traffic every time was not fun. So now I live in a place where there are trails at the end of my block.
Did you move there when Squamish was affordable, or?
The short answer is no.
No, actually.
Yeah, no. We moved during the pandemic because we wanted access to nature and a little more space. My husband and I were both working from home out of a 1-bedroom apartment, a small 2-bedroom apartment. We had only one room with a door that closed that fit a desk in it. And we both needed to be on the phone. So that was tough. But yeah, Squamish has really changed a lot. The 2010 Olympics brought the start of a lot of changes to the town. None of the Olympic events happened here, but the improvements of the highway through here means that traffic really increased, and it's been hugely growing. It's almost doubled in population in the last decade or so, and it's still growing. So it was certainly not affordable when I moved here, but it's even less affordable now.
Can you explain, if people have never been to Squamish before, kind of where it is approximately / why it's so beautiful and popular?
Yeah. So Squamish is located roughly halfway between Vancouver, a world-class city, and Whistler, a world-famous ski resort. So for a lot of years, for a lot of people, including me, Squamish was a drive-through town. It was a place that you stopped on the highway between the two places to go to the bathroom and get some coffee. But that highway that travels from Vancouver to Whistler through Squamish is beautiful. It goes along the ocean and beside the mountains, and Squamish has all of that. So we're right on the end of Howe Sound, which is a ocean fjord. We're next to huge mountains, including Mount Garibaldi, which is Unshkai in the Squamish language, which is a dormant volcano. Lots of trails. I live next to mountain biking trails. This is one of the most popular places in Canada for rock climbing and kite surfing. There's a lot happening here.
Where did you get the idea to start Happiest Outdoors? Because it was inspired pretty much by your love of nature / where are the resources?
Yeah, so I have always been interested in information. So when I started hiking and backpacking in my 20s in university, I was looking for info. It was kind of the early internet days. And so there was some things online and there were some guidebooks, but there wasn't that much. So I started actually as an early Instagrammer. I was one of the like early adopters of
Are you an
Instagram.
OG?
Yeah,
Yeah, you're an
in
OG.
like
Yeah.
2013, 2014, I was on Instagram. And so I was sharing photos of my hikes, and people asked for more information about where I was going. And it was more than I really wanted to cover in an Instagram comment. So I thought, why not start a website to share just about these trips I was going on? And it started as a place to say, like, here are some photos of a trip that I went on with my friends, and here's what we did. And then those kinds of posts led to more questions, which said, like, looks like you had a beautiful trip with your friends, but like, how do I drive there? And like, do I need a permit? What would it be like in September? And I was like, oh, I need to write trail guides. So I started writing trail guides for my website. And then the idea of a published guidebook was still in the back of my head. So in 2019, I pitched a local publisher who specializes, among other things, in guidebooks, and got a contract to write my first guidebook.
That's absolutely wild. And were you working a full-time job while you started to do this? Like what
Yeah.
was your day job while you had this like side hustle going on?
So I have had several careers in my life. I like to say that I'm a retired lawyer. So I went to law school and worked in law for about 2.5 years. I've been retired for a long time now. Um, and
Yeah.
then after that, I went back to my university job, which is working in the outdoor retail industry. So I worked in-house initially, like in the call center, but then at their head office for a mountain equipment co-op, now mountain equipment company. And I wrote product descriptions for their website, how to choose gear articles, staff training materials, anything sort of like gear related. I wrote it. So I was doing that when I launched my website. And I did that full time while trying to have this as a side hustle until 2019.
Would you account like any of your like, I don't want to say lawyer nerd brain, but I'm going to say lawyer nerd brain to how you gather information and like put it out into the world? Do you think that's helpful?
100%. So I was really struggling after I left law because, law is in my mind, or was in my mind and a lot of people's minds, it's a really specialized skill set. You go to school for a long time. It sounds pretty intimidating and cerebral. And I didn't really understand how to translate those skills and that experience to other work. And when I was applying for jobs, a lot of people would say, like, oh, well, you're a lawyer. That's what it says on your resume. Like, you're not going to want to do this for long. This doesn't pay you enough. You're going to go back to law. They didn't believe that I was gonna want to do these other things. And they also didn't believe that my skill set translated. And so it took a long time for me to realize that what I had done in law. So, being able to take a large amount of information and synthesize it into the salient points, to organize it, to make an argument for why you should do something a particular way was all really translating into the type of writing I was doing at work in marketing outdoor gear, which also translated into the way that I could write for my website.
That makes perfect sense. And what was the point where you were like, okay, I'm going to move away from Mac and just totally do my own thing? Was it just like, this is getting too busy, I can really make money off this? Like, what was that big, like, jump off the cliff moment?
I mean, it was a slow build to the jump off a cliff.
Of
I,
course.
yeah, I mean, like, I really loved my job. I loved my coworkers. I loved my staff discount.
Yeah, exactly. You love, I don't know, stability, a normal paycheck, benefits probably.
Yeah, health
Weird,
insurance.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing that happened there is that I just didn't see a lot of room for growth for me there. And there wasn't. And I liked my boss, and she also confirmed there wasn't a lot of opportunities for growth for me. And so I'd go into these like personal development annual review meetings with my bosses, and they would say, like, where do you see yourself with the company in 5 years? What is your personal development goals? And I would just not know what to say. And I remember one time I said in the meeting, like, my goal is to make my website my full-time job. Like, I like full on said that at work. And they were like, oh,
That seems like a conflict, maybe a little bit.
I mean, like, I always had great performance reviews. I was always good at my job. So they weren't going to fire me, but like, it was just like, I couldn't even pretend anymore that I was invested in growing in that way because I just didn't see it. But they were great enough to give me time off. So before I signed the contract to write my first book, I had already started doing the research. And so my first book was backpacking in southwestern BC. It's all multi-day hikes. It takes a ton of time to research hikes of that length. So my bosses had been great enough to give me, like, we already had a generous vacation package, but to give me unpaid time. And was taking a week or two unpaid every year to go backpacking to do research for this book. So I already, kind of had one foot out the door in that way as well. So then in early 2019, MEC went through a fairly major restructure, and I was given the opportunity to stay or go. And I left. And it was a really, really tough decision. I was working remotely from Australia at the time, house sitting for a friend, which is also a thing that my bosses had generously let me do twice, is go to Australia for 6 weeks and work remotely. So like, I really gave up like the most flexible, permissive, lovely job, lovely people out there. So I was like waking up at like 6 a.m. to take these conference calls about like the future of the organization and did I want to be involved and like, did I want to interview for my same job? And I did. I interviewed for my same job. And then I went away on a 5-night backpacking trip on the Overland Track, which is a really iconic multi-day hut-to-hut trip in Tasmania, Australia, through the mountains. It's like a UNESCO World Heritage Area, gorgeous, no cell service. And, like I was just talking to my husband, trying to decide, should I stay or should I go? We came to the conclusion that like, maybe I should just stick it out. It was kind of too financially unstable for me to leave. And then I got back and looked at my email and there was no response. They hadn't said if I had got my new job back or not. So I emailed them and said like, what's going on? And they said, oh, we can't formally offer you a new job, but here's what the contract would look like. And I read it and it wasn't favorable. And my mind changed immediately. I had spent 6 days deciding I was going to stay. And just in that one moment, I went, no, I'm not going to do it. So I conference called my boss and she said, yeah, we're getting this paperwork ready. We're so happy you're going to stay. And I just started crying and said, I'm not staying.
I'm so glad that you listened to your gut. That's so great.
I mean, the first couple of years were lean, but business-wise, I've had some really good ones.
Is it true that your first ever backpacking trip was one of the hardest in North America, the West Coast Trail? And how old were you when you decided to do this?
So yes, my first backpacking trip ever was the West Coast Trail. It's certainly one of the most challenging on-trail backpacking trips in North America and probably the most famous one in Canada. I had just finished university, so it was June. I just finished university. I was about to turn 22. I had been on lots of day hikes. I had been on one overnight hut trip where I slept in a hut, but I had never been on a trip longer than one overnight. I had never slept in the backcountry. I had never pooped not in a toilet. But this guy that I was dating was going to go do the West Coast Trail with his friends, and he invited me to come. And we had been together under a year, and he was a little more experienced in the outdoors. And I was like, oh, yeah, I totally can do this. This is fine. And inside, I was just dying. And so I had nothing. I had boots and clothes, but I had to borrow a backpack and a sleeping bag and everything else. I didn't know how to filter water. Within the first few hours of the first day, my backpack was so heavy that I cried. But as the trip went on, I really grew to love the experience, really fell in love with sleeping outdoors and having these like sort of transformative multi-day experiences in the wilderness. And also really fell in love with that guy. He's my husband of 15 years now.
Okay. You really saved that till the end. Okay. Yeah. You saved that till the end.
Yeah, no, he was great. He was great at introducing me to that experience. He was really patient and helpful.
Was that the test when you're like, oh no, I know I want to marry this guy? Or were you already like pretty in at that point?
I was pretty in at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't get married for like 5 more years after that, but I knew that he was a keeper.
I remember in Newfoundland, he was like biking across Newfoundland. So I'm like, oh, they're like a great outdoor couple. I knew right away when you told me that. So I love that he's the one who introduced you to backpacking. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, I really value the like expertise and stuff that he showed me, but it's also really obvious to me that the way that I was introduced to the outdoors is the way that a lot of women are introduced to the outdoors, which is through a man. And I don't love that part of it. And that's actually a big part of some of the ways that I talk about the outdoors is to empower women to feel comfortable outside and to go outside with girlfriends or, kids or whoever else, and not always to rely on a man to be the big, strong, knowledgeable outdoor person.
Well, I have two thoughts on this. One, my first love of mountains and hiking was actually with my sister out west in the Rocky Mountains. So I attribute that to her. Very lucky in that way. But also, I think that's so true. I love when other women encourage others to be like, come outside, come for groups. And I love that you're doing that as well. But what is the difference, do you find, between solo hiking and hiking with others? Because I love solo adventures as a woman.
Yeah, I used to be really scared about solo adventures. And over the years, it's really become something very peaceful and meditative almost. It's a time to be alone with my thoughts. And once the thoughts stopped being, I'm scared because I'm alone, I do some of my best planning for my business, like introspection when I'm hiking. So I think like the big difference for hiking alone is yes, like those things, but also being confident enough and at peace enough with yourself to know that I am capable out here. I know what I'm doing. I know where I am. I know where I'm going. I know what to do if things go wrong. And I think that's really powerful.
It's so empowering, and I've learned so much about myself hiking alone in the backcountry. Actually, I brought my boyfriend. It was our first time going on like an adventure to upstate New York and the Adirondacks. And it's so funny because I have hiked like 30K in those mountains solo, like scrambling all by myself in those mountains before, right? And we're going up like the simplest, lovely little mountain. And he like holds his hand out to like help me up. And I'm just thinking in the back of my head, I love that he's helping me. But I'm like, this is hilarious. I have literally like almost died here before by myself. I'm not exaggerating.
I think it's just like really inherent learned behavior. Like my husband knows that I will routinely carry a 40-pound pack when we're backpacking. But like if we're bringing in the groceries, he's like, oh, give me that bag. It's heavier. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you know what I can do. He's like, oh, yeah.
But hey, if he's going to offer, like, yeah,
that's also
let him do it.
Let's Take This Outside now has a newsletter. Keep up to date with outdoor news, events, and great discount codes and deals from our partners. Sign up today at letstakethisoutside.ca.
Congratulations on your guidebook, Backpacking on Vancouver Island. This is so cool. It just won the 2024 Banff Mountain Film and Book Festival Award for Best Guidebook. How did that feel?
It was really surreal. So my first book that was published in 2021 was nominated for the same award in 2021, which was a huge surprise to have my first ever guidebook nominated for the award. And it didn't win. And at the time, I was a little disappointed, but not surprised. People enter guidebooks from all over the English-speaking world into this award. Like I think the year that I was nominated the first time, like a book about Scotland won. So like you never know what's going to be submitted. But I've been a huge, like I said at the beginning, I'm a huge information person. I'm a huge guidebook person. The bookshelf behind me is covered in several, like 100 guidebooks. The top 2 shelves are all BC. I have guidebooks going back to the 60s and 70s, historical guidebooks. So I'm a connoisseur. So it was really, really exciting to be nominated twice. And I didn't expect to win the second time. So I was floored when I won.
We're in 2024. Everything's available online now. You give resources online. But do you still find that there is a demand for like a paper guidebook that people can take physically with them versus online?
Yes, and I do think that is really surprising to most people and also kind of surprising to me. So I think that the reason that people want a physical book, there's two reasons. So one is that a physical book is unlike a hiking app or anything like that because it's a curated list. So you can know that I went out and did a lot of hikes and were like, these are the best ones. These are the ones that I think are worth your time. And if you get to know the style of a writer, then you can be like, I trust this writer. I know her opinions. I know the way that she talks about things. And I think that my preferences might match hers, or at least I might understand what her preferences are and how I can adapt my own. So like that curation aspect of it, I think is one thing for sure. The other thing is that like in the digital age, we want to touch things. So I know that like for example, like book talk, like on TikTok for fiction, it's becoming a little bit like a collecting thing. So people will maybe read the digital version of a book they like, but if they really like it, they want to buy the physical one and put it on their shelf and collect it.
And I also think it's just straight up a safety. If you're out backpacking or hiking, your phone doesn't work, or your phone falls off a cliff, which is also almost happened to me. You having that paper map or that paper guidebook is just like kind of like a security blanket too.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't have any illusions that a lot of people are carrying around my book in the backcountry. I think they're probably looking at it before they go.
Yeah, well, it's weight,
It's
right?
weight.
It's extra
Yeah,
weight. Yeah.
like I wouldn't carry a book, but I would certainly carry a paper map and maybe some notes that I had taken from a book that were important for me to know.
What are the most common questions that you get on your website and through social media? And I've also interviewed fellow TMACer Lee McAdam as well. And I think you both are kind of very early. You had very early start in like the outdoor Canada blogging sphere. So I'd love to know from your perspective.
Yeah, Lee's a good friend, and I've actually listened to her episode on your podcast. So I'm
Oh,
curious. I'll
good.
have to go back and listen to it again to see what she said. The questions that I get, there's two kinds. One are like the boring kind of practicalities questions where I haven't given somebody a practicality that they want, like, oh, where do I park at this place or something like that. And those are easy to answer and then just go back and edit the post and put that in so it's there for someone else. But the like bigger questions are really, they come back to people want to feel safe and have confidence. So the questions that they ask are, like they might say something like, is this a busy trail? Or they might say something like, what do I do if I have my period while I'm hiking? But what they're really asking is this safe for me? How can I make myself feel more comfortable in the outdoors? And so trying to get at how to answer that for people and how to give them the confidence to get those skills and feel as comfortable outside as I do is really what I try to do.
And when it comes to the space now, we're just so loaded with information and guides and blogs and everything. How do you kind of still stand out from the crowd? And what, like, I know why it is because you love information and you give very reliable information. I think that's top tier. But how do people find good information when it comes to trails and the outdoors?
I mean, how people find information is constantly changing. I think that a lot of people really rely on apps like AllTrails, which I think can be a good starting point. But I think that the reason that people rely on my work is because an app like AllTrails can give you an aggregation of what people have said about a trail, but those people are of varying degrees of experience. There are varying degrees of sorry, like perimenopause is a bitch.
I'm going to keep that in, actually.
Like seriously, like makes your brain not work sometimes. So I think people get information from places like AllTrails or apps like that, which is a great place to start. But those are all crowdsourced. So you're getting a sort of aggregation of experiences, but you're not necessarily understanding the level of expertise that people have, what time of year they, or what the conditions were like if they don't say. So I think that if you are looking for a more curated and holistic kind of experience, looking to outdoor writers who visited a place multiple times, who have done the research into regulations, and who have something in mind to share with you as far as outdoor responsibility goes is really important. So for me, I've volunteered with Leave No Trace Canada since 2006, and working the ethics of Leave No Trace into my work is really important to me. I don't want to share information and just say like, this place is awesome, you should go. I want to tell people what to expect so that, they have a good time, but also so that they can respect the place, so that they can ensure that it remains beautiful for others to visit, so that they can respect animals, so that they can be conscious of Indigenous context in that area.
This has definitely been talked about on this podcast, Leave No Trace, but you are very heavily involved in this initiative. And what is Leave No Trace?
Yeah, so Leave No Trace is a set of 7 principles that helps guide us in the outdoors so we can leave as little impact as possible. It started in the 1970s after hikers in the Sierras in California noticed that with increased crowds came increased environmental degradation, and they wanted to come up with guidelines for people to help them decide how to behave in the outdoors. So the 7 principles give us a framework around different areas of behavior. So when you say leave no trace, a lot of people are like, oh, I know about that. Pick up my trash. I'm done. And that's absolutely part of Leave No Trace. So one of the principles of Leave No Trace is dispose of waste properly. There are lots of other things to consider. So like ways to respect wildlife, ways to prevent erosion control, ways to share the trail with other users. Everyone deserves to have their experience in the outdoors without disturbing others or impacting others' experiences. So it's things like kindness, but it's also, picking up your trash. Where should you poop? Where's a good place to put your tent? It's all covered.
And where can people find information?
LeaveNoTrace.ca is the hub in Canada, and lnt.org is the sort of parent organization in the States.
I was going to ask you about some of your favorite trails in BC. You are like the trail expert in BC, but there are many environmentally sensitive and protected areas. With Instagram and TikTok, like people are just like, look at this secret spot and blah, 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 right? How do you feel about people revealing some of these secret spots? And how do you feel about revealing some of these favorite trails and these secret areas?
Well, I think one thing to point out is that if you're posting something online and calling it a hidden gem or a secret spot, it's probably not. Lots of people already know about it. Using those words is a buzzword we use on social media and in general online to try and create interest and exclusivity. And it's often quite false. So if you see something marked that, just know that it's probably not secret or hidden or anything like that. It's probably fairly well known, at least locally. The other thing that I'd say about that is that I've seen a lot of discourse online, especially in the last 5 or so years, where people posting photos and saying, I'm not going to tell you where this is. It's a secret spot. It's for locals. It's too environmentally sensitive. And I think that really bothers me because I think that the outdoors are for everyone. A lot of people, as we've already discussed, don't feel comfortable going into the outdoors. They rely on mentors to help them into the outdoors. And traditionally, the outdoor community has been male and white and privileged and has kept the outdoor community that way by saying, oh, you don't have the skills to come here, so you don't get to come here. And there are so many people who are getting into the outdoors now, women, LGBTQ folk, people of color, who don't have those traditional mentors to show them the way. And they're learning about places online. And so to say to somebody, this is for locals, this is for experienced people only, this is a secret hidden gem, you don't get to know about it, to say to these other people, you don't deserve to be here. And I don't think that's fair. On the other hand, of course, I do respect that places that are ecologically sensitive need protection. So I think the solution and the way that I approach my work is if I'm sharing anything online, I'm sharing where it is and I'm sharing how to get there and I'm sharing how to be respectful. I'm sharing what your impact could be. And I want to make sure that, like I said, these places are not a secret. They're not a hidden gem. If I don't talk about them, somebody else is going to talk about them. So let's talk about them in the most responsible way possible.
Do you actually have any secret spots you don't talk about?
I mean, I have like trails I hike near my house that I would never recommend to anyone because like they're fun to hike near my house, but they're also just like not that cool. You know what I mean? Like the little waterfall near my house with the wooden bridge in front of it is the place that I'll take my friends if they come to visit because it's like be like, cool, look at this little waterfall that's a 20-minute walk from my house. But like, please don't drive here and come see this waterfall. I will tell you 20 other waterfalls that are nearby that are better to see. Like, it's just not that great.
You mentioned you live near Garibaldi, but you are part of Friends of Garibaldi Park Society. How are you involved with that, and what is it?
So Friends of Garibaldi Park Society is an organization that works to do volunteer trail maintenance in the park and also works for advocacy issues for access and funding for the park. I'm currently the president and have
Oh, you're very
yeah.
involved. Okay.
I've been the president for about 4 years, I think, something like that. The park is a place that is really special to me. So the park, if you haven't heard of it, it's one of the largest provincial parks in BC and one of the first. I think it's the second one ever. So it stretches through the mountains, sort of east of Squamish, from Squamish all the way north of Whistler. So it encompasses a lot of really beautiful backcountry mountain terrain, including Inchkai, Mount Garibaldi, Garibaldi Lake, Elfin Lakes, parts of the Whistler backcountry behind Whistler Mountain, and then Wedgemount Lake in the north. So it's a really special local place for me. It's the closest place to my house to go backpacking. And it's also a place that, because it is an hour or two from Vancouver, one of the most popular places in BC to hike. And because of that popularity, the trail system, infrastructure, and funding are really not keeping up with the demand. And there's been a lot of conflict and drama in the park in the last few years, just to do with those crowds and how to manage them. So I've been really involved in where we can, trying to help with trail maintenance in the park and also advocating with BC Parks about policies for the park and access. And on a broader level, working with larger umbrella organizations like the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC and the Federation of Mountain Clubs of BC to advocate at a provincial level for more funding.
Something that I'm seeing more and more in today's travel media, which is so important, is including Indigenous context. And you've even, I believe, said a couple Indigenous names of some areas close to you. Can you give me some more context on that and why that's so important to you?
Living in BC, almost all of British Columbia's unceded traditional territory of Indigenous people. There were almost no treaties in BC, and our Indigenous population is large and often still in their traditional territory and close to major communities. So the Indigenous population in BC is part of most British Columbians' everyday lives in some way or another. It's not as remote as it can be in other parts of Canada, and many of our place names already are anglicized versions of Indigenous names. So this is something that is not new for us. What is new in the outdoor community is acknowledging that the places that we recreate are Indigenous territory. It's not like, oh, like when the Indigenous people were here, they used to do this. No, they're still here.
Right.
They're still doing those things. And in places where they aren't there, like some of the Rocky Mountain National Parks, it's because they were forcibly removed. So I think that it's really important to reframe the way we think about exploring in nature. And we often use these colonial metaphors about conquering mountains or going into untouched wilderness. And that's not true. That's not what's happening. The places that I hike, especially on Vancouver Island, if you know what to look for, there's so much evidence of Indigenous use for generations. Like I was in Haida Gwaii in northern BC, the islands off of northern BC last summer, and our guide took us to see a dugout canoe that had been partially carved and left in the forest. Where I live now, there are culturally modified trees because the Squamish Nation is still continuing their practice of sustainably harvesting cedar bark from live trees to weave into baskets and hats. So that's something that I see all the time on my trails. It's still happening here, and it's something that we should be talking about and thinking about when we're outdoors.
Thank you for talking about that. I think it's really important. What are you working on now? What's next?
So my last book, Backpacking on Vancouver Island, I don't live on Vancouver Island. And so that was actually logistically a challenging book to write. It's a pretty short trip. I live 40 minutes from the ferry. But I've decided in the near term anyway, I'm not going to write another book to a place that I don't live. It was really, really time consuming with the travel. So right now I'm just taking a break from guidebook writing to reset and refocus, working on my website, trying to decide where to go next with that. And just taking some time to chill out. I tend to spend the winters writing and planning for the following year. And since we're just in November now, I'm not really anywhere at all in the planning phase of that process.
As we're having this conversation, I'm like so inspired to go back to BC. There's no place like it. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it is really unbelievable here. And I think that I feel really fortunate to live here. But I do think that it's really important for Canadians to remember that there are beautiful places everywhere in Canada and that you do not need to come west to enjoy nature. Finding nature that is close to your house, I think, is really the most valuable thing, no matter where you live.
I totally agree, but I still want to come back to BC.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not discouraging you. Please come. Our tourist economy relies on you Ontarians.
Taryn, HappiestOutdoors.ca. It's the best information that you are going to find about BC. Thank you for finally joining me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. For more Let's Take This Outside, go to letstakethisoutside.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.